And no, wristwatches were not originally intended to be worn by men. They were a ladies-only accessory. Though things have been changing a lot recently, wristwatches and the whole idea of wearing or collecting them is still very much seen as I would say, male-dominated space. But if we look way back to the origins of wristwatches, we find that no, it was not intended to be worn by men. Oh no, they were made for women. Centuries ago, women's attire wasn't really equipped to make space for pocket watches. So in order for them to, adorn themselves with something so sophisticated and fancy as a watch, these pocket watches needed, some form of alteration to be worn by the ladies. And so instead of having them hang on by a chain, which needed to be attached to something and then put into a pocket, hence the name pocket watch, watchmakers fashioned watch cases onto bracelets that could be, just simply and elegantly worn around the wrist. According to Guinness World Records, the very first wristwatch was made for and worn by a Hungarian noblewoman in 1868 by none other than famous watchmaker Patek Philippe. Other sources report that the very first watch was commissioned and worn by Caroline Murat. Yeah, Napoleon's younger sister, who asked watchmaker Breguet to build her, and then that's a quote here, a watch with a repeating mechanism on a bracelet. That's very much like a wristwatch. In 1810, in addition to a travel clock she ordered from him too. There's also an arm watch gifted to Queen Elizabeth I in 1571 by Robert Dudley, but there isn't much more information on that. So perhaps women have been, wearing watches even way before the 1900s. Have you ever noticed that almost all hands-on analog wristwatches have the hand set to something very close to 10 past 10? Well, there is a reason for this, of course. And no, though I read about it shockingly often, it is not because Abraham Lincoln was shot at that time. Which, by the way, he was shot at about 10:15, so that's not even accurate. About 6 years ago, in 2017, an experiment was being conducted to find out exactly why 10 past 10 is the default used for setting clocks and watches in advertisements. And here is what they found out. So yeah, let me read that out loud for you because it's really cool and very interesting. So the data on the first experiment revealed that watches set at 10 past 10 showed a significant positive effect on the emotion of the observer. And here comes the kicker, the intention to buy. However, watches set at 8:20 did not show any effect on the emotion or the intention to buy. Moreover, watches set at 10 past 10 induced in women significantly stronger ratings of pleasure than in men. So it's basically this. The main reason is that when the hands are set to 10 past 10, they resemble a smiley face. The marketing theory is that it will help us feel happy by looking at it and thus become more likely to buy that watch. There's also the added bonus that when hands are, set this way, they're unlikely to cover, any popular complications like a day or a date display, which can usually be found at 12, 3 or 6 o'clock. But yeah, it's a really cute explanation to why we mostly see this exact time on watches in ads, and it is not because of Abraham Lincoln. So the next watch myth was something I learned about from a Watchfinder video that I will also want to include because it makes so much sense when you learn about it, but it's something you rarely think about. So nowadays, Swiss made is still considered to be a very desirable feature when it comes to luxury watches, since, Switzerland is considered the home of watches to people from all over the world. You hear Swiss made and you think of quality, especially when it, comes to watches, but that wasn't always a thing, and here's why. Back in the day, around the 19th century and earlier, if you wanted to buy a watch, you were, mainly buying it from someone out of France or England, because that's where, most of the technology and art industry was located at the time. But it also came with a downside over time. When these countries became, wealthier, production costs did rise too, and so less and less people could afford buying items like watches because they were also considered luxuries back then. So the market demanded a cheaper alternative, as always. And so it happened that during the winter time, when there wasn't much to, do out in the field, housebound farmers would make use of their forced break and started working in watch workshops to make some money. And yeah, those farmers were mainly Swiss farmers who came down from the Alps and basically had nothing to do. It all came together when during the Industrial Revolution, prices rose even higher and cost of labor became far too expensive. so that Switzerland was right there to take over the business, leading the watch industry to what it is today. The next myth could be, considered more of a misunderstanding, or perhaps, more of a gimmick for its initially intended purpose, and that is keeping track of your oxygen with your rotating bezel on your dive watch. And I know, I am guilty of this myself in some videos when reviewing dive watches, for example. I mentioned the rotating bezel, and I'm pretty sure that in some of my earlier videos, I explained the bezel by saying something along the lines of unilateral rotating bezel to time your dive, etc., something like this. Well, this isn't false. It certainly isn't really what it is used for anymore, and only kind of scratches the very surface of what divers actually nowadays need from any sort of the diving gear. There's a really good article from Hodinkee about multiple dive watch myths. I will link it for you down below. But here's the shortened version about the rotating dive watch bezel. So the bezel basically only does one simple thing. It tracks the passing of time, which means that it has only very little to do with your actual dive time, left, as you could stare at your bezel for an entire dive and still accidentally suck your tank dry if you don't also check your submersible pressure gauge regularly to make sure that you still have enough air to breathe. I mean, yes, you could guess how much air you've got left if you know your air consumption rate and stuff like that, how much you breathe in a given amount of time, but that's more useful for creating a dive plan than it is a reason to ignore your pressure gauge. So ultimately, the bezel on a dive watch can be used for lots of things that only require simple timing. Timing a total dive time, your decompression stops, for example, swim distances and surface intervals, or just baking times, which is one of my favorite uses for that bezel. But until watchmakers figure out how to sandwich a pressure gauge inside a watch case, your dive watch is never going to tell you how much air to breathe you have left in your tank, so don't rely on that. Okay, the next one has to be one of the biggest myths, or even lies so many people, and it's how we tell themselves. The popular myth or belief that you will only ever need one watch, or just one more watch, until you're completely satisfied and happy with the state of your collection. If you're part of the 0.0001% of people who are and will forever be happy with just one watch, well, congratulations. But let's face it, for most people, we're already looking at the next watch, though we've just put on our latest purchase. And I have to say that I actually don't mind it at all. I mean, hey, I have a watch box to prove it, but yeah, brace yourself for the inevitable case that you're going to spend some more money once you start getting into watches. For many outside the watch world, GMT is just another time zone. For people inside the watch hobby, it is also a very popular complication and part of some, really iconic watches, like the Rolex GMT Master 2, for example. So what if I tell you that GMT, the Greenwich Mean Time, which gave the GMT complication its name on watches, isn't really what you think it is, and here's why. The Greenwich Mean Time is the mean solar time at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, London, counted from midnight. And that's the important part, because at different times in the past, it has been calculated in different ways, at noon, for example. And so as a result of that, it actually cannot be used to specify a particular time unless a context is given. The name of the actual time zone in the UK is UTC plus, midnight, so 00.00, and is the basis for a civil time there. There's also the fact that because of Earth's uneven angular velocity and its, elliptical orbit and its axial tilt, noon, so exactly 12 GMT is rarely the actual exact moment the sun crosses the Greenwich meridian, so the, line that runs through the observatory in Greenwich. So noon GMT is just the annual average, so the arithmetic mean moment of this specific event, which that's why it's called Greenwich Mean Time. So yeah, here you have it. 6 more of the most shared myths and misinformations about luxury watches and the actual truth behind it. If you have more myths you want to, dissolve and clear up, then share them in the comments down below. And if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, I recommend subscribing to my channel, and then I will see you in my next video. Bye!